Usually when we look at corporate America, there's this underlying assumption, right, that if a company spends billions of dollars on a problem, they're absolutely going to solve it.
Right, you just throw money at it.
Exactly. You throw money, you hire enough consultants, maybe you throw some training at a business issue, and boom, the issue goes away. But then you look at the world of process improvement, and that logic completely falls apart.
It really does. It's a massive paradox, and it's basically what we are unpacking today.
Yeah, and we have a really fantastic source for this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's this fascinating paper from the California Management Review back in the summer of 2001 by MIT researchers Nelson Rippening and John Sturman.
And I have to say, the title of the paper is just brilliant. It's called "Nobody Ever Gets Credit for Fixing Problems That Never Happened."
It's such a good title.
Right. And the scope of their research is staggering. I mean, they spent a decade conducting these in-depth case studies across, telecommunications, semiconductors, chemicals, automobiles.
Pretty much every major industry.
Exactly. And the ultimate finding they present right at the beginning of the text is that fewer than 10% of Fortune 1000 companies had well-developed, successful process improvement programs.
Fewer than 10%. And we are talking about massive programs like Total Quality Management or Six Sigma. Those statistical tools meant to ruthlessly eliminate defects.
Right, or trying to build a culture of continuous improvement. Companies spend hundreds of billions on these things.
And the wild thing is, the paper points out that the reason your company's new efficiency program failed isn't because those tools are bad. It's actually because human psychology is, actively at war with operational physics.
Yeah, carefully done studies show that when these programs are used properly, they absolutely do work. The companies that actually commit to them completely outperform their competitors.
So it's not the tools.
No, not at all. The failure happens because of that systemic clash you just mentioned. So in this deep dive, our goal is to give you, the listener, a shortcut to recognizing this clash, understanding why it happens, and hopefully escaping this trap in your own professional life.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand why a supposedly foolproof statistical tool fails, we first have to understand the fundamental ways that work actually gets done. The authors talk about the physics of process performance.
Yeah, they break it down into a very simple equation. Basically, the actual performance of any process equals the time spent working, multiplied by the capability of the process used to do that work.
Okay, wait.
So, if you are running a manufacturing plant, your output is your labor hours multiplied by your productivity, meaning how many usable units your machines and systems actually allow you to produce per hour.
Time spent working, times process capability. That sets up a really interesting dynamic, because if there is a gap between your desired performance, like the goal set by senior management, and your actual performance, you're falling short.
Right.
And as a manager, you really only have two levers to pull to close that gap. The first is what the authors call the work harder loop. You authorize overtime, you speed up the assembly line, you demand faster turnaround times from your team.
And, the seductive thing about the work harder loop is that it closes the performance gap immediately. If you boost the work week by 20%, you might increase output by 20%.
But only for the duration of that overtime.
Exactly. Once the overtime stops, the output drops right back down. The second lever is the work smarter loop. And this involves investing time in improving the capability of the process itself.
So that's like doing preventative maintenance or training your staff on new software, stuff like that.
Yeah, eliminating the root causes of defects entirely. This creates a permanent increase in capability. So every subsequent hour of effort yields a better result. But, and this is crucial, it comes with a delay.
The delay. The delay really changes everything. Let's ground this in an analogy. So working harder is kind of like drinking 5 espressos to power through a really physical task today. You get it done fast. But working smarter is, spending 6 months going to the gym so the physical task is just naturally easier to do.
That's a great way to look at it.
Or like driving your car at 100 miles an hour to get to work on time, but you skip your oil changes because you, quote unquote, don't have time for the mechanic. You get to work fast today, sure.
Right, but you're destroying the engine.
Exactly. Working smarter is taking the car to the shop. You might be late one morning, but the engine runs smoothly for the next 10 years. But here's my question. If the engine seizing is an eventual certainty, Why does the text say working harder is standard operating procedure for almost every organization they studied?
Well, it's because that delay in the work smarter loop makes it incredibly risky for managers who are facing a crisis right now.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if a vital manufacturing line goes down and a massive client is waiting for a shipment, a manager isn't going to send the team to a reliability training seminar. They are going to push for overtime to get the product out the door.
Which makes sense in a vacuum.
It does. But the core issue the researchers found isn't that managers use the work harder loop to deal with isolated emergencies. The issue is that the work harder loop stops being a temporary fix for variations in workload, and it basically morphs into the constant routine way the organization functions.
Because time is a finite resource.
Mm.
It's a zero-sum game. Which brings us to the really dangerous organizational spiral the authors call the reinvestment loop.
Yes, the reinvestment loop.
Because if management is constantly increasing the pressure on people to just do more work, those workers have to steal time from somewhere else. They put in unpaid overtime, they work nights and weekends, and eventually they reduce the time they spend on improvement.
And because time spent on improvement drops, the capability of the process begins to erode. Machines wear out faster, designs become obsolete, workers literally forget the nuances of the training they received years ago.
Wow.
And as capability erodes, the performance gap grows even wider. So management sees the drop in output and has to push for even harder work just to maintain the status quo.
I can totally see how that becomes a death spiral.
Mm.
But wait, how do organizations actually keep the lights on when capability is dropping that drastically? There has to be a mechanism that artificially inflates the output, right? Something masking the decay.
Yes. And the authors identify that masking mechanism as the shortcuts loop. When overworked people need to close that performance gap right now, they start cutting corners.
Like what kind of corners?
Well, they skip preventative maintenance, they ignore documentation requirements, they stop holding improvement team meetings, and because the drop in capability from skipping these things is delayed, cutting those corners actually gives the organization a temporary grace period of high output.
Oh, man. If you are listening to this, you have probably experienced this.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've ever pushed uncommented code just to hit a Friday afternoon deadline, knowing you are going to absolutely hate yourself on Monday when you try to read it, you have been in the shortcuts loop.
Exactly. You save time today by not documenting your code, and you get the software shipped. The penalty doesn't hit until months later when a bug appears and nobody knows how the system works.
And this better before worse dynamic is what lures organizations into what the text calls the capability trap.
And the trap is incredibly sticky. What's fascinating here is how fear drives the behavior of the workers to keep the trap hidden.
Fear.
Yeah, workers actively hide these shortcuts from management because they're in a double bind. They have to hit aggressive throughput targets, but they're also strictly mandated to do these improvement activities. There just aren't enough hours in the day.
Right, so they're set up to fail.
Exactly. So they do whatever it takes to hit the deadline, and they hide the corners they cut.
The text uses a really great example of this with product development engineers. Management provided this bookshelf of reusable designs that were meant to make engineering more efficient. But instead of using it, the engineers were just ignoring the bookshelf entirely to hit their immediate punishing deadlines.
Yeah, and the text cites a specific instance at one firm where the development engineers actually called their weekly progress review meetings the Liars Club.
The Liars Club. That is wild.
It is. And the mechanics of the Liars Club are a perfect distillation of this fear. Each participant would overstate the progress of their subsystem and completely hide known defects.
Wait, really? Just straight up lie about it?
Yes. They were all collectively hoping that someone else's defects would be discovered first. Because if another engineer's subsystem failed publicly, it would delay the whole project, which would give everyone else a few extra weeks to secretly catch up on their own hidden work.
They are actively deceiving each other just to survive the pressure of the system. That is so toxic. But that brings us to a massive question. If the capability trap is literally destroying the company from the inside out, why do smart, experienced executives fail to realize they are in it?
Right. You'd think they'd notice.
Yeah. If output is eventually crashing, shouldn't a logical manager investigate the root cause? The paper argues that the answer actually lies deep in how our brains process information.
It really does. It comes down to a well-documented cognitive bias called the fundamental attribution error. This is the human tendency to blame problems on the character flaws or attitudes of individuals, rather than looking at the systemic environment those individuals are operating in.
So we just blame the person in front of us.
Basically, yeah.
Hmm.
As humans, we are wired to assume that cause and effect are closely related in time and space.
Right. Like if I see a broken part on the assembly line, my brain immediately looks for the person standing next to the broken part. I don't naturally look for some invisible policy decision made 3 years ago.
Exactly. You see a machine operator producing a high number of defects, you assume the worker is lazy or undisciplined. But the true cause of that defect might have been an inadequate training budget from 6 months ago, or a decision to skip purchasing a vital maintenance tool last year.
Because the true cause is separated by time and space from the immediate physical result, the manager naturally blames the worker's character.
Which leads to what the authors call the self-confirming attribution error. And this is a brutal psychological trap. We can trace the logic step by step.
Okay, let's trace it.
So the manager genuinely believes the workers are slacking. So the manager applies more pressure, they demand daily status reports, they set stricter quotas. The workers, trying to survive this new wave of pressure, dive deeper into the shortcuts loop to hit the target.
And so output goes up temporarily.
Exactly. And the manager looks at that spike in output and feels completely vindicated.
Oh, wow. The manager thinks, see, the pressure worked. I knew they were just slacking. It perfectly validates their incorrect assumption.
Yes. They have no idea that the workers achieved that spike in output by sacrificing long-term capability. The manager just learns that turning up the pressure gets results. And, when the managers eventually do discover the hidden shortcuts, their view of the workers as untrustworthy is confirmed again, so they feel forced to monitor them even more closely.
It just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
And the long-term result of this psychological cycle is a corporate culture that fundamentally changes who gets rewarded. This goes back to the title of the paper. Nobody ever gets credit for fixing problems that never happened.
It's so true.
Because the organization is constantly dealing with crises caused by low capability, it begins to only reward the firefighters. The war heroes who swoop in, work 80 hours a week, and save a doomed project at the last possible second, they're the ones who get the bonuses.
While the people who quietly maintain the system...
Exactly.
Yeah.
The people who do the preventative maintenance so the fire never starts in the first place, they are completely invisible.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it alters the entire leadership pipeline. Senior management soon consists entirely of these war heroes who built their careers on last-minute rescues.
Right.
They naturally groom and favor other crisis-driven people who think just like them, which completely institutionalizes the short-term, work-harder mentality at the highest levels of the company.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The authors point to a striking example of just how blinding the fundamental attribution error can be for those executives. They quote a senior manager who was trying to explain why his company's improvement program failed.
Oh, this part is wild.
Right. This manager didn't blame the crushing deadlines or the lack of resources. Instead, he blamed the culture of Western engineers. He explicitly stated that program management was a problem in Western cultures, claiming that Japanese and German engineers were naturally more rigorous and disciplined.
He even mentioned he didn't know if it was hereditary or societal, but that Western engineers simply pushed back against discipline.
It's crazy, but it perfectly illustrates the author's point. When management cannot see the systemic trap they have built, they invent inherent character flaws to explain the failure. They generalize an operational failure into a literal national stereotype rather than just look at the physics of their own assembly line.
The capability trap just creates this environment of blame that totally obscures the actual mechanics of the business.
Okay, so now that we see the anatomy of this trap, the physics of eroding capability and the psychology of blame, how do organizations actually escape?
Well, the text details that escaping requires changing the mental models of the people involved and accepting a very difficult reality, the worse before better dynamic.
Worse before better. That sounds like a tough sell.
It is. Because if you want to invest in the work smarter loop, you have to accept that performance is going to drop in the short term while you build capability. But the source provides 2 detailed case studies of organizations that successfully navigated this.
The first one is the chemical company, DuPont, right? In the early 90s, DuPont realized they had a major problem. They were spending more on maintenance than their industry rivals, but they actually had lower equipment uptime.
Yeah, they had the highest number of maintenance employees per dollar of plant value, but those mechanics work more overtime than anyone else.
It was the textbook capability trap. They were constantly fighting fires and doing reactive repairs, leaving no time for planned preventative maintenance.
Exactly. But a manager named Winston Lidett and his team realized that just lecturing the workers wouldn't work. They needed a tool to break the attribution error. So they built a system dynamics model, which is basically a mathematical map showing how different parts of a business affect each other over time.
Okay.
But they didn't just show a spreadsheet, they turned it into an interactive role-playing simulation called the manufacturing game.
Wait, how does that actually work in practice?
Well, they had workers and managers play the simulation to experience the capability trap firsthand, but in a compressed time frame. So over a few hours, players could see how skipping a maintenance check-in, say month 1, caused a catastrophic failure in month 6.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Right. The simulation revealed a counterintuitive truth. The only way to improve long-term reliability was to intentionally take workable functioning machines offline to do planned maintenance.
Which means, in the short run, uptime goes down. It literally gets worse before it gets better.
Yes. But once they pushed through that short-term dip in the real world, the reinvestment loop started working in a virtuous direction. Taking machines offline prevented unexpected breakdowns. Fewer breakdowns meant mechanics had even more time for planned maintenance.
It cascades.
Exactly. They upgraded pump seals, they improved training. The results were staggering. The mean time between pump failures rose by an average of 12% each time their cumulative operating experience doubled.
That's huge.
Direct maintenance costs fell by 20%. For the company as a whole, conservative estimates showed they saved over $350 million a year in avoided maintenance costs alone.
Okay, so DuPont proves that taking machines offline fixes the physical process. But what about the financial panic? I mean, if I walk into a CEO's office today and say, I want to improve the plant, but maintenance costs are going to spike by 30% for the next 6 months while output drops, I am absolutely getting fired.
You probably would, yeah.
How do you convince leadership to stick with this? But I think this perfectly tees up the second case study, British Petroleum's Lima refinery.
Oh, the Lima refinery was in terrible shape in the mid-90s. It lagged far behind other U.S. refineries. BP was actually planning to sell or close the facility entirely.
Wow, so the stakes were incredibly high.
Very high. But some employees introduced the exact same learning lab and manufacturing game that DuPont used, and the workers decided to take ownership of their future and implement proactive maintenance, even with the threat of closure hanging over them.
And they hit that financial wall, right? Yeah. During the first 6 months, their maintenance costs ballooned by 30%.
Yes, 30%.
If management hadn't understood the mathematical certainty of the worse before better dynamic from the simulation game, they would have panicked and canceled the program immediately.
But they held their nerve through that 30% spike. And then the breakthrough happened. Pump failure times went from 12 months to 58 months.
That is almost 5 years.
Yeah. By taking the hit to pause operations, they gave themselves the breathing room to actually fix things.
There's one specific detail from the text that I think really shows the power of this breathing room. A BP team at this refinery had a problem with butane flaring off. Basically, they were just burning away profits into the sky. When they finally had the time to look at it instead of constantly fighting fires, they solved it in 2 weeks. It cost $5,000 to fix.
And the return on that is just unbelievable.
Right. That $5,000 fix saved the refinery $1.5 million a year. That is a 30,000% return on investment. Because of improvements like this, the refinery was saved. BP didn't close it. They sold it to Clark USA for $215 million, saving hundreds of jobs in the community.
It's an incredible turnaround.
But here is the critical question for anyone listening. The text says the BP workers already knew how to fix that butane problem for 8 years. The engineering know-how was there, the parts were mostly already on site. So why did it take a simulation game to get them to actually install a $5,000 fix?
Well, the barrier to improvement was never a lack of technical knowledge. It was the mental model. When you're constantly putting out fires, a 2-week installation is physically impossible. Before playing the game, the workers believed they had no time, no resources, and no power to make a difference.
They just felt completely stuck?
Yeah, they believed the system was rigged. And management believed the workers simply didn't care. The game allowed everyone to step outside their roles, see the invisible systemic delays, and realize that improvement was actually possible. They had to break the cycle of self-confirming attributions and blame before any technical tool could work.
Wow, so to summarize what we've covered in this deep dive, pushing for immediate results without investing in process capability forces workers to take hidden shortcuts. This triggers the capability trap, where performance slowly bleeds out over time. Because human beings naturally suffer from the fundamental attribution error, connecting immediate visual causes rather than delayed systemic ones, managers blame the people instead of the system.
And that just reinforces a vicious cycle of pressure and decay.
Exactly. Real, lasting improvement requires the courage to let performance dip in the short term, embracing the worse before better dynamic to build long-term capability.
It requires looking at the invisible system, having the patience to let the work smarter loop do its job, and just refusing to settle for the quick fix of working harder.
So, for you listening, take a look at your own professional life. Are you hiding how overwhelmed you are from your boss, cutting corners just to survive the week? Are you in the liar's club? But consider this too. What if the ultimate capability trap isn't just in our workplaces, but in our personal relationships?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Right. Think about it. When we are stressed and short on time, we often take shortcuts with our partners and families to get through the day. We don't have the hard conversation. We snap instead of explaining, thinking we'll just make it up to them later. We experience a temporary grace period, but the process capability of our relationships silently, steadily erodes. The next time you find yourself working harder to manage a personal conflict, ask yourself, are you just fighting fires, or are you willing to endure a little short-term difficulty to fix a problem that will never happen again?